Good evening, everybody. I'm Mikey Edwards, and thank you so much for attending my IPC Applied Project presentation, which will be a focus on social penetration theory. To start, why did I select this theory? To answer that question, I would like to share a short personal story. When I was in kindergarten, I had a friend named Jaden. Not a best friend, but a friend nonetheless. We had bonded over our mutual love of the show Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that was all we talked about every day. Thankfully, we were only 5 years old, so it was enough to maintain our young friendship. However, after a couple of years of going to grade school together, I sadly changed schools and frankly didn't think about him again. I forgot about him right away. Years later, I was in my final year of middle school, 8th grade, and you'll never guess who was assigned to sit next to me in science class. Jaden. I'd seen him around the school from time to time, but because we had both since moved past our Ninja Turtle obsession, I didn't feel like there was much reason to say anything to him other than the occasional, "Hey, Jaden," as we passed each other in the hallways. However, as we began to work together on science projects, we began talking and realized that we had much more in common than our previous habit of watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What began as small talk soon turned into us sharing our opinions on politics and anything, and eventually became an invitation to hang out at my house after school. Jaden is now currently my best friend. He was my best man at my wedding, and he is the closest thing that I have to a brother. How on earth did we go from silly kindergartners who could barely remember each other's names to this? The social penetration theory actually answers that question. Have you ever moved to a new school or city and had a hard time making any real friends? Have you ever had a romantic relationship that started off okay, but then eventually petered out? Do you dread going to the dentist or barber because of the awkward silence that you may have to sit through? Though I'll give you an in depth definition of the social penetration theory on the next slide. The reason that I chose this theory is because I feel that it shows us an easy way to improve the quality of our relationships, as well as what happens after those relationships have been strengthened in all aspects of life, to include friendships, romantic relationships, and even relationships that are strictly professional. In addition to the class textbook, I was able to find three peer reviewed academic journal articles to help me gain a better understanding of how this theory works. One of them is an academic journal from the University of Indonesia that compiled data from multiple social media studies and surveys to see how self disclosure over social media sites leads to romantic relationships via the social penetration theory. Another study is from North Carolina Community College that uses this theory's framework to see how success coaches at community colleges attempt to strengthen their relationships with the students they're in correspondence with so they can better develop and maintain positive interpersonal relationships. Finally, I referred to a peer reviewed journal article that utilized the social penetration theory to focus on how friendships over Facebook develop and progress using, and I quote, self reported surveys and content analyzed data on friendships maintained through Facebook. Pennington, 2021. So, what is the social penetration theory? The textbook states that this theory describes relationships in terms of the number of topics that people talk about and the degree of personalness of those topics. DeVito, 2023. It measures this by gauging the depth of topics as well as the breadth of topics that are discussed between two individuals, the breadth being how many topics you talk about. Another factor in strengthening relationships, according to this theory, is self disclosure, or the act of sharing information about oneself. Do you tell coworkers or acquaintances everything about yourself? Or do you share personal feelings and beliefs with close friends over time? I can't speak for everybody, but I certainly only self disclose personal information to those that I trust or respect. And of course, talking about many topics at a very deep level with someone while self disclosing is something that occurs in a close relationship. But what do you call it when a relationship starts to fade and significant communication becomes less and less frequent? According to the social penetration theory, this is simply known as depenetration, which is thankfully very easy to remember. And I don't know about you, but I'm a very visual learner. So I included the onion model to help better explain just how this theory works. There was a more simple picture of this in the textbook, but I thought it would be more interesting to have an actual picture of an onion. So when a relationship is new or not very strong, communication takes place on the outer layers of the onion. Here you're going to have things like small talk or short conversations and generally less impactful communication. However, once you begin to grow closer in your relationship, you may start to tell each other more about yourself or share your opinions on topics that might be divisive. This creates trust, this creates closeness, and eventually, your communication will often take the form of deep conversations that can span for hours at a time or sharing of information that you usually wouldn't tell anybody else. And so you can see in the onion picture, you have those more personal topics and important communication aspects in the center, while maybe your acquaintances will remain on the outer layer of that onion and only having small talk or short conversations, whereas your best friends or your romantic partners will be in the center of that. So now that we have a general idea of what the social penetration theory is, let's move on to the next slide to see what I was able to learn from my first source. So in this first source, which the title was, uh, it's being blocked by my screen sharing. Sorry, let me see if I can move that. Application of social penetration theory to the development of romantic relationships through social media. So, what's this source about? This study aims to find the relationship between self-disclosure and the growth of romantic relationships via online dating using the social penetration theory's statements about self-disclosure. And before making this study, they had a hypothesis. And that hypothesis was that the researchers believed that analysis of data gathered in studies about forming romantic relationships on social media would show a strong correlation and a strong connection between self disclosure and more intimate relationships being formed. So, what are the methods that they used to research in this study? So this research used descriptive qualitative approaches in combining data quoted from several journals to gain new understanding. This study aims to identify academic journals that discuss topics related to the theory of social penetration and its connection to social media and online dating. The data utilized comprises publications obtained from research journal databases to include, and I quote, Scopus, Google Scholar, Sage Publication, and Taylor Francis, SciWall 2024. The articles that were selected were between the timeframes of 2015 and 2022 to ensure that they had continued relevance. And a total of 30 journals were identified through systematic research of international standard academic journals using certain keywords relating to the social penetration theory and online dating in order to find those. And subsequently, a rigorous selection process was employed where they decided to choose 5 scholarly journal articles to be subjected to comprehensive analysis for this study. And the 5 chosen publications would be utilized then for the theoretical examination of how the social penetration theory relates to relationships that are romantic being formed on online dating social media sites. And they also made sure that they had specific geographical locations for the research conducted for these studies. So the United States was identified as the primary research site, making a significant contribution because there were 2 academic journals selected in the final process from the United States, which was 40%, of course, of the overall selected journals. Following that, there was 1 journal from Canada, the Netherlands, and 1 from Indonesia, which was the country where this study occurred for the University of Indonesia. And so they made sure to examine the utilization of social penetration as a strategic approach in the context of interpersonal disclosure and information seeking within the realm of romantic relationship development via social media. So they were really looking to see when romantic relationships are being formed, how much are people sharing about themselves? How much are they self disclosing? That was a major focus of this. And of course, this was analyzed by employing the frameworks and layers of self disclosure as outlined in the social penetration theory. And according to the theories about relationship development, in the social penetration theory from Altman and Taylor. Changes in the nature of interactions are a sign of how relationships are developing as interpersonal connections progress. And this is a direct quote from the study. Individuals encounter several considerations pertaining to self-representation. Considering the varying stages of relationship development, it's expected that individuals will employ communication technologies in distinct ways. Individuals who engage in text-based communication technologies, such as instant messaging, have a tendency to disclose personal information much more frequently and with a higher level of intimacy compared to those who communicate in face-to-face interactions. End quote. Sayawal, 2024. Therefore, it is believed that the utilization of communication technology in online settings promotes self-disclosure due to the reduction of self-consciousness often associated with self-disclosure, because it's a lot more scary to tell someone in person that maybe you have feelings for them or maybe you don't have feelings for them, as opposed to being on a dating site where maybe you can be a little more brave because you don't have that instant pushback when you make that leap of faith and tell them something, which is something that they were taking into account with this study. However, with this study, there were a few limitations, and the main one was just the lack of sources from other countries besides the US, Canada, Indonesia, and the Netherlands, which is only 4 countries, right? And this could potentially skew the data in one direction due to the cultural differences in dating culture between countries. So patterns found in one area may potentially be absent in another. So that was one limitation of this study. However, in the end, the 5 studies that they selected for use, along with the data collected from online dating websites and applications, did suggest strongly that self-disclosure is still an essential aspect of growing relationships, even online, which falls right in line with the social penetration theory. And that was what their hypothesis was focusing on. Additionally, it even appeared that self-disclosure was more common over online dating early on in relationships than in person. And like I said earlier, I definitely can see how this works because for me at least, it's a lot less scary for me to tell someone that I'm interested in them over a text as opposed to saying it face to face, where you have to deal with the consequences of your statement right away. In conclusion, the manner in which individuals engage in self-disclosure within the context of forming romantic relationships via the social media exhibits variation, of course. This study demonstrates that the communication process in the establishment of relationships, initial relationships, moving to romantic relationships, facilitated by these social media sites, plays a significant role in self-disclosure among individuals. This is attributed to the ability to gather information about the other person through various forms of communication, such as text messages, voice recordings, audio files, and received photographs, all to better strengthen and develop interpersonal connections. And I also felt that this study did a great job showcasing the relationship stages theory and how people would move from one stage to another. You know, that initial contact, they might not self disclose as much, but as the romantic relationship develops and they trust each other more, they're more interested, they move on to other stages where they self disclose more and more and more. And of course, that is very similar to the relationship stages theory. But what do we learn from this study the most? I think that we just learned that online social media sites and long distance communications are viable ways to develop and maintain a strong relationship in accordance with the social penetration theory when people build trust through self disclosure and communicate a wide breadth of deep topics. So, just knowing this, we can have more confidence that even if we have to have a long distance relationship, whether that's with a romantic partner, with our family, with our friends, we're still able to progress in that relationship, and those strong relationships will still always yield deep communication and varied communication when we make that significant effort. So, my next source that I was able to use was titled Success Coach Student Relationship Development at the Community College, a Communicative Approach Framed by Social Penetration Theory. So, the next source that I utilized, of course, was a study in an academic journal from North Carolina Community College about the professional relationships between success coaches, kind of like an academic advisor, and students that they were trying to help. So the source seeks to use the social penetration theory in order to see how these community college success coaches foster positive interpersonal working relationships with the students whom they're assisting. And of course, this is to connect the interpersonal communication theory with academic student support practices. That's what this study is aiming to do. And early on in this study, uh, they had their hypothesis, which they first explained some basic aspects of social penetration theory, which we already went over in the third slide. But this source pointed out a paradox to relationship building for success coaches. And that paradox is that they have to build meaningful interpersonal relationships with all these constraints. They need to have a close relationship of trust, but there's constraints on time and frequency of interaction. How often did you see your academic advisor on your freshman year? If everything was going good, no more than a couple times, right? So this study hypothesized that success coaches need to hone their interpersonal skills to develop relationships that are meaningful but accomplished purposefully in order to achieve successful student outcomes. And of course, that falls in line again with the social penetration theory of when you get those strong relationships, you're going to have more meaningful communication, more effective communication, which is the goal of these success coaches. So this study, as far as the research methodology goes, utilized a qualitative research approach to explore the relationship building practices of success coaches with their students. So in-depth interviews were conducted with 17 success coaches from 4 community colleges in southeastern United States, and they were selected through purposeful sampling. The interviews focused on communication strategies employed by success coaches to foster productive interpersonal relationships with students. And additionally, participants were observed in their working environment during interactions with students by the researchers. And data collection involved audio recording interviews, resulting in 337 pages of transcriptions. The interviews were then analyzed using open coding to identify recurring themes and concepts. Theoretical coding was then applied to interpret the data within the framework of the social penetration theory of relationship development, Cooper 2022. There were some limitations to this study, and one of them was that no students were included in the data collection. They were only collecting, of course, data from the success coaches. So the participants in the study, the success coaches, were not in any position to answer questions about how students may have perceived them potentially, just how they wanted to be perceived and the steps they took to be perceived that way. That was their main focus. So that was one limitation to this. However, the findings for the conclusion of this study, the findings revealed common communication strategies amongst success coaches, emphasizing the importance of establishing trust and rapport with students through openness, in-depth dialogue, one of the factors of the social penetration theory, depth of dialogue, and purposeful self-disclosure, another part of the social penetration theory, about similar struggles that the success coaches themselves had to overcome. These strategies align with the principles of interpersonal communication within the social penetration theory perfectly. And the physical environment was also crucial, they found. This was beyond the social penetration theory findings that they were looking for. They also found that the physical environment was crucial, with success coaches making efforts to reduce barriers and create inviting spaces for interactions. They also decorated their offices and had student-friendly elements like candy, snacks, and artwork. Cooper, 2022. There were also different communication channels that were studied, such as face-to-face interaction being preferred because obviously it's a little more easy to have those interpersonal connections, but there were still phone calls used and video calls and email for just very simple communications like general reminders. And there were a couple of challenges as well in this study. For example, success coaches were dealing with a lot of pressure and frustration whenever they couldn't get a hold of the students that they were trying so desperately to help. And without contact, you can't build upon that relationship. You can't get closer to the center of that onion. And honestly, I thought this source also demonstrated the relationship rules theory very well, in addition to the social penetration theory, because of the way that it demonstrated how students reacted better when success coaches were consistent in the way they treated them, which would be a rule within a relationship. And what do we learn from this source? I think that we learn that even our professional relationships are greatly benefited when we choose to expand our communication beyond the surface level. Deep conversations without variety with a therapist or many shallow conversations with a coworker won't add to the closeness of the relationship. But if we follow those interpersonal communication strategies from the social penetration theory, like adding to the depth and breadth of topics discussed and using self-disclosure when appropriate, we'll greatly improve the quality of communication with that individual. So it helps us in our professional lives as well. And moving on to the third and final source that I was able to use for this project, uh, this was titled Extending Social Penetration Theory to Facebook. So, what's the purpose of this source? The University of Las Vegas, Nevada used the social penetration theory as a lens to view communication relationships maintained through Facebook, Pennington, 2021. This study also sought to build on existing literature about relational development, maintenance, and dissolution, which deep penetration, right? Dissolving of those relationships through social networking sites by testing key assumptions within the social penetration theory and their applicability today. So the hypothesis for this study was interesting. They actually had two hypotheses, and the first one was that relational partners will have the greatest depth, breadth, and volume of communication on the friendship page, which the friendship page is something that they described early on in the study, but that's simply a page on Facebook where you can look at all the messages, likes, and interactions between two Facebook friends. And so that was their first hypothesis, that relational partners will have the greatest depth, breadth, and volume of communication. And then the second hypothesis was that current friendships will have greater depth, breadth, and volume of communication on the friendship page compared to acquaintances. And of course, those were direct quotes from the study. So that's Pennington 2021. The methodology for this study, the study recruited 103 participants from 3 Midwestern universities, with roughly half of them identifying as female, so half male, half female. And the participants' ages ranged from 18 years old to 53 years old, with the average age being 21. And most of the participants were white, but there were African American and Black participants, as well as Hispanic, Latino, biracial, mixed race participants, and Asian Pacific Islander Hawaiian participants as well. So the average length of the relationships that are being reported over these Facebook sites was almost 7 years, and the participants had an average Facebook network size of almost 6 friends. It was actually technically 5.99 friends. Participants were randomly assigned to scenarios corresponding to different stages of social penetration theory and provided access to the friendship page for analysis. They completed an online questionnaire about their selected relationship and responses to an open-ended question, and their responses to those open-ended questions were used to categorize relationships as current, acquaintance relationships, or lapsed relationships with deep penetration, those relationships falling off. The friendship pages were then coded for cues related to shared posts and self-disclosure proof, just like the social penetration theory, Pennington 2021. Some limitations of this study was the relatively small sample size and the fact that factors such as age, gender, and physical proximity to online friends were not taken into account. However, I did think that this study was a very good example of the relationship stages theory as well, that because it showed how communication differences between close friends and acquaintances do differ. So before the study even started, I noticed that, okay, this will show, different communication levels between different stages. And the conclusion of this study was that in the end, the test showed a significant positive correlation between depth, breadth, and volume of communication between close friends on Facebook, Pennington 2021. This confirmed that the stages of the social penetration theory were being represented. And additionally, subsequent analysis for the first hypothesis was conducted using the coded friendship page information. And the overall model showed a significant difference, indicating that the relationship stage, acquaintance versus close friend, influenced depth, breadth, and shared posts. Additional analysis also found that there were great differences in depth, breadth, and shared posts across other relationship stages, such as acquaintances, in support of hypothesis one. And the second hypothesis was tested as well, and current friends showed, of course, higher levels of depth, breadth, and shared posts compared to lapsed friendships and acquaintances. However, there was actually no significant differences that were found between lapsed friends and acquaintances when they actually looked at that. So if you had someone that you were really close with before and then maybe just an acquaintance, it was about the same depth and breadth of topics as well as self-disclosure that were involved in those conversations. However, their hypotheses were proven correct as the closest friends did have the highest levels of depth, breadth, and volume of communication, as well as having more of that compared to acquaintances or lapsed friendships. Overall, the results provided support for the hypotheses and research questions regarding the influence of the social penetration theory on friendships with Facebook communication patterns. But what do we learn from this study most of all? I think our biggest takeaway is that friendships, even online ones, are greatly affected by an increase in self-disclosure and meaningful, varied, and deep communication as per the social penetration theory. So when you see these strong friendships, you see an increase in self-disclosure. You see an increase in meaningful, very deep communication. So if you want to avoid deep penetration and losing those friendships over time, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it, making sure that you maintain those conversations and talking about many topics. Today, we were able to go over the basics of the social penetration theory, including the concept of self-disclosure being an integral part of relationship development, with depth and breadth of topics during conversations being an indicator of overall relationship strength. We learned not only about how relationships can grow stronger, but also what kind of communication takes place once they become strong, those deep, varied conversations. We did this by learning from 3 academic peer-reviewed journal articles, including one about how the social penetration theory can be applied to romantic relationships forming via social media at the University of Indonesia, another about how this theory can be applied to success coaches from community colleges improving their professional relationships with students from North Carolina Community College, and finally, we learned from a study conducted by the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, about how this theory relates to the interaction levels of close friendships on Facebook. Though interpersonal communication theories are unable to explain all the aspects and all the phenomena of communication between two individuals, I hope that you were able to learn as many new things about the content of how the content of communication affects the development of relationships as I did, because I learned a ton through this study. So thank you so much for watching. Let's go make some new friends. And for reference, here is my works cited slide. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the entirety of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're able to learn as much as I did. Have a wonderful day.